And I was like, yo, Mr. Stemler, I'm going to do the plaster, hand holding the gun. And you're like, boo, boo, go back to middle school.
It's so funny because like you end up being like so influential in ways that you don't know when like students come back and they say, oh, you said this to me. And it's like, just reminds you to be so careful.
So careful.
Yeah.
Matt.
Chris.
Thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh, you're so welcome. I'm so thankful to be with you today.
It is a real pleasure having my favorite art teacher from high school.
Probably the only one, at least at this point. But so, yeah.
How much of the creative artistic process is creating order from chaos?
I think it's probably the first part of the business of that is using design in a way that will pull from what else is out there, everything that's out there. So you're implementing a way of paying attention, I think I would say, drawing your attention to something. So first order of business, absolutely.
When people think about creativity, is it really an artist having an original thought that's come out of absolutely nowhere, ex nihilo? Or is it drawing your attention to something and it's the artist framing or composing something, some order from that chaos?
Yeah, right. It's a good idea, and it goes so many different ways. For one thing, when you mention the idea of framing, I think that is the way we are creating a distinction between what we're looking at to interpret versus the rest of the world. We create a frame around it. That frame can be design, right? That frame could be a conceptual framework of some kind or another. Do we make it, or is it there, right? That's the question. And I think some of that is the freedom of both, right? We are meaning seekers. And so all the things that are around us have potential, right? We even think about in Genesis, the world, when in Genesis, it refers to the idea of trees are good for fruit and they are also beautiful. And so there's this like balance that happens that, I think in some ways we want to separate that, but I think that our real calling is to kind of like keep those together, and I think that's the challenge, not just of making things, but of living, I believe.
Yeah. Continuing that trajectory on framing, is it possible to be deceitful by cropping something out? How do you tell the truth with the frame you choose?
Oh, that's so true, right? Sometimes it's not what's in the picture, it's what is left out of it, right? But I think that framing is that distinguishing factor, choices made, and maybe evaluating those choices in themselves, right? It's all about like, what are you arranging on the picture plane versus what's out of it? Mm-hmm. How are you creating relationships of the things that you're showing, whether that be the subject matter, abstractly thinking color shapes and things like that.
As a designer, as a storyteller, you have a lot of power when you're directing someone's eye towards something, because you can tell a story in the way that you frame or crop or design something. Do you have a responsibility with that power?
I guess I would, if I'm going to repeat my teaching methods, right? Mm-hmm. I will constantly say to students, you are loving the people that you are sharing your ideas with, right? And so on that regard, there is responsibility, but there's also hard love. And I think that is part of it. I feel that what the responsibility comes down to is intentionality. And I don't mean to say that you have to understand everything that you're putting into it and the exact the exact effect that it's going to have. But I do think that your job is to identify the context that you're creating and what that might convey, evoke. Mm-hmm. What's the word? Gaslight that.
Right.
I don't like using modern words. Mm-hmm. right? But there is, in that way of approaching, I think that you are more aware of the other. And as much as coming up with ideas, if we're going to say creating or making artwork is an internal process, there's always being aware of the other.
Yeah, gaslight and all these TikTok therapy terms that are kind of like popping in. We're so psychologically aware these days with like the short form, narcissism and BPD and all this stuff. I love the word that you use, like manipulate. So, right. So if you are, what's the difference between evoking a feeling in someone with the color palette that you choose or manipulating a feeling in someone? And maybe if you can take that further, holding that question, how can you manipulate the paintbrush, manipulate the colors? And that is, that's a virtue as a good craftsman, but not manipulate the feelings of someone else.
Yeah, I mean, exploring just the idea of manipulating, I think, has its own connotations, right? I believe that inviting might be a better word that I like to use. I'm going to back up and ask, where does that question come from in you? I know you're a filmmaker. I know that you're doing very similar things with moving pictures and stuff, but like, where would that question come out from you first?
Wow. Turn the question back on me. Well, manipulation to me means to use for one's own end. So if I'm going to manipulate a light source to cast a shadow across someone's face to give it more contrast, that is a virtue. I'm using the light source for my own intentions. I think where it becomes something that is not aligned with my values is when I'm trying to control someone else's emotions. And right, so for me as a filmmaker, I have to be very careful about what kind of music I select. If I'm trying to communicate to a person that they should consider, well, right there, that word "should" is risky. But if I want to communicate to somebody that they should invest in this new business that I've been hired to market or support a nonprofit, and I go to a third world country and I find some poor looking person and I film them crying and I throw a sad music track onto that, that for me would feel very disingenuous. That's not inviting somebody to support the vision. For me, inviting would feel like I'm interviewing the staff that is working in that field and have them tell their story about why they do what they do. And then it's up to the end viewer to choose to support or not, but not to make them feel guilty, right? That control, that manipulation of somebody else's feelings. As far as I have reflected on it, that's what manipulation reveals in myself.
I think what's interesting about your question is that it brings in like politics, right? And that is a factor that kind of like we can frame within modern art, going back a little bit more in the century or so. It's like one of the ingredients that happens is this idea of, I don't want to say propaganda, but the idea of not just presenting an idea, but having someone try on that belief. And I think that's been a bit of a change. So I guess when you're saying manipulation, I'm thinking like how much we have political agendas that push us. Now, I am interested in, for sure, this idea of people trying things on, ideas, for sure. But I don't know if I come at it as manipulating. I think I'm too apologetic for that, which is probably not a good thing, but I'm often apologetically putting something out there. Hey, what do you think?
Wow.
Right. Instead of demanding, you ought to think.
Yeah.
And that has its own kind of power, I think a little bit more subtle. I had this interesting situation when I had my MFA and I was doing all this work with materials that maybe we would consider humble, trash bags, bark, things like that. In fact, it was my critics' intention. It was their intention that I play with things that were harder for me to be craft oriented with. I have a lot of experience in many materials. I think that I have a pretty good handle on making sure that things will kind of work in form to the way I want to. And so it was a way of kind of like putting something to trip me up, not in a bad way, but more in a way that is, what more can you get out of things? If you are working with stuff that is just not high end, can you still be creative? Can you still do the act, right? And so working through a lot of materials and still kind of coming up with things, I was shocked when in my final critique, I was about the fourth student in line, and this is like the last shot for professors to kind of get in their comments, right? In a good way. They want that last moment of shaping. And I was watching student after student kind of get, I don't want to say shot down, but really kind of put through the Miller.
Yeah.
And it got to me, and I kind of held my breath, and I'm like, okay, here it comes. Just be prepared. Mm-hmm. And the first critic says, you have a redemptive quality about what you're doing. And I was just, the chills, because that was my intention, but I don't remember articulating that to anyone, anywhere, in any way. It was just the approach to caring for the materials and the approach to allowing the materials to create a form and in that way invite people in. The materials were elevated from a state of, in a sense, really rejection, right? Discard.
Yes.
And like, that was a learning moment for me, even though I had done the work. It was, wow, it's that powerful if that is your direction, to raise this material up to a new level. So, yeah.
I think what stands out to me most about that story you just shared is your critics' understanding of the process and intent of the creation of your final piece, and your respect, you redeeming these discarded objects. You were not approaching it in a manipulative sense of like, I want to make you feel something with this final product. I think so many of us, with this whole like AI revolution and stuff, it's all about like, what's the final product? Like, how does this make you feel? And we've completely lost that, the creation story is what gives this world and everything in it its value is the 7-day story, right? The process in which God organized light from dark or water from land. And the fact that on the 7th day he rested, implying not that he's tired, but that it required some amount of effort, right?
Is it okay to think that God is pausing to reflect, right? Isn't that what happens? It's good, right? There are these moments throughout where it's good, it's good, it's good. And then there's the enjoyment of that, right? I like that you're bringing in process. I stand firmly behind the idea that God is a process God, and that applies to my life. I have to think about that constantly, and things come up, and you're reminded time and time again. But I think that the artist process is one in which I guess I would say that I am okay with there being like a little bit of openness toward. And so there's a piece I did in which I had filmed something a couple years in advance. I collected objects, and I had this phrase that I would give to there's a phrase that I would give to my sons, right? Like, how do you protect your sons when they're going out, your children, when they're going out into the world? Like, what do you install in them? And one of the phrases was, the most dangerous people have something to prove, and they don't know what that is.
Wow.
Right? And so thinking about all these kind of components, at one point they all folded underneath that phrase. I knew that the phrase was kind of like the energy of the idea. The filming I had done was getting really close to a yellow jacket's nest and filming them in slow motion. And so the camera is right in next to it. And I'm allergic to bees, so allowing them to zip past my ear and in, and then come out and just pass me by. And then looking at that, you would understand in slow motion, you can hear their bodies bouncing against rocks and all this other noise. And that feels really antagonistic, right? And we're supposing that that is the danger. But in the piece itself, it compares the idea of what we see as something as dangerous. Yellow jackets having this yellow and black coloration with Tonka trucks, right? Tonka trucks are also yellow and black, and with those Tonka trucks, I motorized them and put them on a sensor so that anytime people got near them, all of a sudden they came to life. Lights would come on. I'd put bolts into their tires, and they would growl and move and all that stuff. And then when they would turn off, you would hear this peaceful sound of the bees doing their thing, coming in and out of the hive. So it just becomes this wonderful like thing where I was like, what we are looking for as dangerous really is not in nature. It's not as dangerous as what we do as people. Tonka trucks kind of representing the idea of flattening, destroying, and rebuilding on our own terms. And so like that correlation between what to look for as dangerous and human beings building things relentlessly, right? Trying to prove things that they don't know. I mean, it became like a wonderful idea behind that. So like process is about like not always this idea of I am working towards something, as you say, with using AI. You have an end result in mind. But I think the process is just allowing yourself to saturate and the things that are around you, trusting that or holding off on that impulse to say, I know what this means. This is going to draw together, versus allowing them to kind of like, steep for a while, then come together. And, when you're talking creation, I wonder, like, what was that steeping thing going on in creation, right? And that was part of it, is taking a step. Is this good? Is this right? Is this in order? Is it communicating?
Pausing,
absolutely, yeah.
I put myself in the shoes of a man with something to prove and no idea what that is, and wondering what are the two possible directions that one could go with that might be, better than where that place might otherwise lead you. And one of them is try to understand what it is you want to prove so badly, and then continue trying really hard to prove that, or be willing, give yourself permission to give up that pursuit to prove something and be willing to explore. Be willing to take what's in front of you, whether it's discarded objects or beehive or Tonka trucks, and explore the human visceral feelings of fear that you might have, and pull that in. And I feel like so many of us with this like Instagram culture, like anything you create, any art piece you create, 1,000 people, 10,000 people might see it. And there's this fear of like, oh, I need it to be good. I just want it to be good. I think few artists are willing to just sit and explore. What kind of feeling does this make me have? Like, how do I organize what's in front of me?
I mean, that's a great question, because I think that we still struggle with forming things, right? There's a craft that needs to happen there. And I know for myself that that's where I become a perfectionist, but it's not first order. It really is more, do ideas line up, right? We talked about this idea of, is it truthful, right? Is it communicating well? I think, is it researched well? You know, have you given it time? Have you built out the subject matter in a way that you could make subtle connections instead of hitting someone over the head with an idea?
I remember back in high school, you were, I think you missed a class because you were doing a presentation. You had worked hard on a project. It might have been with the penitentiary or something, but you came in and we all asked, so how did it go? And you said, I was prepared. And it was like just this like really humble way of saying, it's like, I had done my research. And I mean, some of the other people weren't, but I was prepared. And it was like, I remember remembering that and being like, yeah, do your research and like know your stuff. Like being an artist, it isn't just like, you know, you don't just improvise it all. You discover the part of the creative process is you discover what you come across, but also do your research.
Yeah. And maybe that's some of my approach too. I probably talked to you about this idea of like being an image DJ when you're working with things, so that as much as we, and even myself, gets locked in sometimes to, oh, this specific image is going to hit the point exactly. Being able to, if you're doing research, you're just expanding potentials, right? And you're able to kind of like mix it up as you're moving along. In another installation I did, I was in the middle of working on something. I probably already had 2 months of woodwork hours in the studio. And at some point, I realized that a particular form I was working toward, it just wasn't going to cut it, right? And I had to make that decision. Do I just continue anyway, right? Or do I just switch in process? And, you know, when your end goal, we all have deadlines, but if your end goal is just a deadline, then the work will suffer, I think. The ability to adapt in that situation, right? And I'm sure you're familiar with that with filming, right? Somebody doesn't know their lines, they show up late, whatever that might be. But I think that a lot of artists that I know, including myself, we are very hardcore about certain things, but and we do want it a certain way, ultimately. But I think the flexibility, until all that kind of filters down to a final form, really allows you to get the most potential out of any piece. Honestly, yeah.
As professionals, you know, you might have a commission where somebody is hiring you to create an art piece for an installation, or somebody might be hiring me to create a commercial with a narrative to it. And at the end of this month, there is that deadline. We have been paid, we've been hired to create something. And halfway along the line, I realize that in the editing room, that expensive car crash that we filmed for this narrative is not cutting it. Or you're working on an art piece and you've put all this time, you went down this rabbit hole to discover something, and you realize that wasn't it. And quickly, you need to pivot and you need to deliver something because the client paid you. And part of that process is the editing. It's the cutting, the killing of darlings, as we say it in the industry. My question for you is, do you think God was discovering his creation as he was making it?
Wow, that's such a big and important question, and one that might be fraught with answers if I'm careful. I'm not careful here, but I like it. Because aren't we made in God's image, right? And the joy of creation for God is the relationship with it, right? Kind of manifested in our being made in his image, right? And so I got to think about, like, when do you know you're capable of something? I know that's a very dangerous, I don't want to like put it out there as like, are there God's limitations and things like that's not where I'm going with it. But this idea of, this is where you might want to cut something out, but I actually look at the dinosaurs because like I've heard so many theories of the dinosaurs on the Christian realm. Like I was teaching a class one time and we were looking at Noah's Ark, and the questions the students started coming up with became about dinosaurs. I'm like, what is going on here? And I realized that in their teaching, that for them, either the dinosaurs are on that ark or they're not. And I was blown away. I was dumbfounded, I've heard other theories that, like the dinosaurs are like this, like junkyard of gods working towards stuff. And like, again, knowing that God is this process God, and I will not be able to bring this all together in my own theory of dinosaurs and God. It's not going to happen today, right? And it's as much as we've been arguing over aesthetics for centuries now in so many facets. So it's one of those arguments. But the thought that something was like a training session for God is just so bad. Right?
Well, look at the flood. I mean, is the flood, okay, so God creates humanity and people, and then they become sinful, and they're disrupting the order of his creation in their own way, which he gave them the capacity to do. And is God saying, whoops, all right, time for a little course correction. You've got to wipe them all out except for the people on the ark. Or was this all a part of his plan the whole time to kind of in support of his own glory, the emancipation or the death of all the human race.
Right,
So,
right. Boy, we've wandered into dangerous territory. I love it.
C.S. Lewis would approve.
Yeah, yeah. I still think that God's interest in us is that relationship, right? And I'm not trying to get around anything by saying that, but that's what it's about. Like that's what we're longing for, and that's a whole nother part of like what we could talk about. Where does art come from? The idea of longing, right? Longing for that relationship that was in the garden, longing for that one that will come next, and so on.
Well, here's a question.
Yeah.
Is this conversation we're having now in dangerous territory, being willing to wrestle with difficult concepts, is that a creative process of exploring, of attempting to create order from chaos? Is that a reflection of God's image, this conversation?
I will answer that because there is an element of God's creation and order in it. And I think that we look at that and say, okay, well, God has set up an order, but I think order is something that is maintained. And God has allowed times in which chaos comes back in. It's a withdrawal from maintaining a kind of order. It's a reminder to us that when it comes to God's providence, that his sustaining of us in an organized way or in order is important, right? It's right there. Symbols in the Bible that point toward chaos are the desert wilderness, water, right?
Fire, salt.
Christ walking on water that is in turmoil and things. I mean, these are very evident things. And so it's interesting to bring those two together in this conversation where where our conversation gets offline, right? That's disorder, right? Or,
well, how many times as a professional artist have you intentionally allowed chaos into one of your art pieces to convey that point exactly?
I think it depends on the approach that I'm using. For drawing, I found that with my more abstract drawings, just going at it for a while, putting marks down, erasing it, allowing kind of the physical activity right, to do the work, reacting, being intuitive, gives me something later to shape a little bit more specifically. But there's more specifically when I'm thinking about charcoal drawings that I do, it's apply, 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 erase, erase, move around, and then there is a form that I think that I'll slow down, get to know a little bit more, and then shape, define in some ways, right? It's non-objective, so the image is resolved when it reaches a certain point, right? Now that point is determined by me. It has to do with how things relate to each other within that process, the shapes, the textures, value. So I think even in the brainstorming process, I think there should be a bit of chaos, right? There should be, all good work is a balance of personal and universal symbols, right? So there's this like playing around with, well, what are my personal symbols, right? How might that then engage something beyond me? And so back and forth, and your brainstorming is about just allowing things to pop up or disappear and pop up again, and kind of like negotiating with ideas, concepts, forms. Yeah.
But think about your final canvas when you're drawing and then you're taking your kneaded rubber, right? Or rubber.
Kneaded eraser, yeah.
Kneaded eraser, and you're erasing it. It doesn't all come off.
No.
There's a little residue left. And imagine a student who is approaching a piece like you would, and they're erasing it, and all that texture and the fingerprints and the crap is like kind of all stuck there. And then on top you have the decisive final form, versus another student who is terrified of doing the wrong thing. So their final piece is completely perfect white, and then the one contrast of the black, and it's a little like, and you can just feel the anxiety in that final art piece.
I feel like you remember that I used to take erasers away from young students. Right? Oh, that's so good, because one of the things I like to think about, explore, read about, listen to is like science ideas, and like the idea of deep time, right? And like how in geology we look at these deep layers and we try and make sense of them, what has happened in the past, the history of things. And there's just something so potent about the fact that we can't erase every mark that we make on a piece. We can cover it over. But the fact that you can't erase it, and then being able to pull that back into it being part of the history of the piece. I mean, when you talk about like biblical worldview and, redemption and all that, I mean, what a beautiful metaphor for stuff left over, yet still having the potential to be a beautiful part of that piece. I mean, that's a great conversation. I'm glad you brought it up.
Yeah, well, I mean, so like the film Oppenheimer, one of my favorite movies, other than it just being a fabulously directed film, like there's this part of it's like they didn't use any computer effects in it, right? They actually did that. Yeah. Or like if you watch one of those, I'm sorry, Top Gun actor.
Tom Cruise.
You watch any of those Tom Cruise action movies and you're like, he actually did that. Like that's the whole marketing part. And these movies gross $1 billion because he actually ratcheted himself to a plane that went up into the air, right? So in the film process, it's like them actually doing it. That the end film is not just a great, fun 2-hour flick. It's proof of the experience of the whole production crew and the actors doing all of that for real.
It takes me to Walter Benjamin. Have you heard? Okay. Walter Benjamin is, I'm going to say, an aesthetics philosopher, art theorist. And one of his biggest essays, I think as a recommendation offline here, you should read Art in the Age of Reproduction. And he works through different aspects of what art has. It has aura. It has it has authenticity, right? It has a context that it is created in, right? And one of the attributes that he notices about things being reproduced is it pulls it away from all of those things. And by you bringing up the Tom Cruise and Top Gun, what is interesting is that we are seeking the authentic, right? And so, oh man, how can we circle back and sort through all these things that we just mentioned and connect it with, well, what is authentic, right? What is authentic making? What is authentic as far as ideas? Wow, I could just go on thinking about that for a while. It's amazing. But to pull something out of those things, it becomes 2D, right? It becomes flat, right? And one of the things I mentioned earlier is this idea that we are meaning seekers, and that's. I think that is something that we are looking for is depth, right?
Well, to pull some order out of the artistic and everything that we've
Right.
talked about today, tell me a little bit about where your love for fences comes from.
Fences.
Fences. Is it not true that fences are a motif of yours? Paths, maybe?
Paths, probably.
Paths. Okay, I remember in high
Right.
school you said you had a lot of cow drawings and there's a lot of fences.
Oh, that's funny.
That was a
Yeah.
motif of yours.
Well, and that what isn't a motif, right? If you look at them and backtrack, the idea of borders and crossing borders and like things like that. Yeah. If I don't say it here, I think some people would be disappointed, but I grew up on a farm, right? And there's so many things that come out of that as far as like how you understand the world. The farm I grew up on had beef cattle, and so there's this amazing idea of like how they are moving about the landscape according to what time of day it is, how they're interacting with it, certain paths that they're creating, how they're restricted to a certain space, right? If we're talking framing and so on, and how they like to escape that as well, right? Yeah.
Well, I remember recognizing that as a motif of yours, and I was, for my concentration to AP art, I was considering my own. And I have a love for trains. My dad and I built the model trains growing up, and then for me, I love train tracks. This slicing through this. There's this doom of an unstoppable force that will be coming, but it is constrained to those tracks, usually speaking. Sometimes I'm like, oh. But yeah, I think I definitely lifted some of your cow and fence and with me with train and train tracks.
Right. And I think what's interesting where they also connect is this, the idea of perspective. They point toward the horizon so much, right? Which is another element of my work, if you wanted to get into or not. But like, the horizon being this.
The eternal.
Right. It's evasive even as you walk toward it, right? Some of the work that I've done kind of investigates that idea of the horizon. It's a phenomena that we're living with, right? Things diminish in size, detail, color, and we live with that as something that's formative for how we understand the world, right? We have an internal horizon line, one that is made up of our memory, right? The closer we are to something, in a sense, the bigger they are, the more detailed, more colorful, right? And then as that kind of like marches into the past, right? There's this idea of diminution with that as well. And I think that that's something that, as I said, I've dealt with that as a subject, but just it is something to remind you that there's, just the fact that we're not saying here are things, but here is a phenomena, right? It's like engaging with that throughout, as subject matter throughout everything that we're engaging with. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, it's so cool because horizon also is behind you.
Yeah.
There's an eternal in both directions.
Exactly.
And your path will end at a certain point. You probably can't see it yet, but it's there. And then there's a horizon beyond that. There's something beyond.
Yeah. And in some writing I've done, about making artwork, I was exploring the idea of the question horizon, right? Which is very similar to the whole process thing that we've been talking about, right? This idea of like, well, what questions are getting you closer and closer to that thing that you're making, right? And then at a certain point, you've made it, you've let go of it, it's there. But the horizon kind of gets picked up by somebody else as they begin to like connect with it. I think it was Tolstoy saying, interpreting one's artwork is about one's horizon meeting another. And it like comes together so well as a metaphor instead of like a metaphor for art being a thing, a phenomenon. I mean, that's wonderful. Don't you think? Yeah.
To build, as human beings, being able to create on top of what somebody 500 years ago created, and for them, an artist of skill, leaving something behind for someone else to build upon.
Right.
Right. Like I think Star Wars is one of my favorite movie franchises, but I think the biggest failings of the most recent 3 is those creators didn't leave anything behind for people that would come next. George Lucas is like, here you go. Like, this is all these different routes you could go. And all they did was just repeat what he had done before. Just like you said, reproduce.
Yeah. Yeah. And that film was built on a myth, right? A history assumed in which, in some ways, I find it interesting because people are still parsing through that with extended writing about it, books and things like that. But, Lucas had a real respect for the myth of something, myth being like, well, what are its origins, right? What can we tell? What does that tell us about us? And so on. And like the fact that it's built off of something like that, which is not all nailed down, allows so much interpretation, right? That's what you're talking about, is the fact that people have been able to expand on that in their own way according to what we understand about the myth. So, yeah.
I will restrain myself from going down the Star Wars rabbit hole because we'll be here for another hour. So you mentioned that you do some writing, some creative writing, and I'm wondering what the integration overlap between your 2D design and your writing skills are and how they inform each other.
Yeah, they do inform each other, and at different points. I think that some artworks come out of writing. I'll wake up with an idea and it's not formed visually, but it's a phrase or something like that. We talked about the phrase that I use for advice to sons. Titles might show up before the artwork does, and so they'll inform each other. But I think, in a sense, balancing this idea of not knowing what something means even though we're making it, but then on the outside, allowing ourselves to kind of reflect in the process, right? I think there is a difference for me between articulating ideas in words versus articulating ideas in form as far as visual arts. But they are parallel with each other. And so for a long time, I did a lot of writing after the fact. I'll just make this thing. And it feels like it's come together. There's a solidity to it. There's a cohesion. What is that about now, right? And then being able to unpack those ideas through writing has allowed me a lens to, I think, be intentional as I'm moving forward. And my writing now has a lot to do with using aesthetic philosophies. We mentioned Benjamin. Others are like Deleuze and Guattari, 1,000 Plateaus, things that are influential on what art is now. And a lot of those come out of psychoanalysis, desire, ideas like that. But like how, and they feel like the right language, and they are in a sense, the language that is used now to describe a lot of things as far as aesthetics and so on. But like parsing through that and seeing, well, what am I doing? Does that align up with those ideas? And always reaching for bigger and bigger ideas. I think it's like the constant challenge. I know that as a artist, as a teacher, I am conceptually driven. Technique is very important. It is for myself, and being able to complete things. But I know that the driver for me is ideas, right? And I think a lot of that is handing motivation over to students, right? Instead of saying, I need you to do these techniques, this idea, and then complete those. I think as students mature, you have to switch that a little bit and teach them techniques, but then allow them to be motivated themselves as far as like finding the answers to these bigger questions. What is important to me as far as like ideas and communicating.
How do you encourage and cultivate the young creative mind, the college 19-year-old, while also being critical and saying, listen, you can do better, and there are some serious flaws in your process here that I can identify? How do you balance love, cultivation of creativity, and hard love and critic?
Hey, that's such a good question. I think I know that I have high expectations of myself, right? And I know that students pick up on that as far as their work. I like to talk about their work under the guise of potentials. You have this here. You've gotten to this point. But where can it go next? How does that become a question that can be answered in 2 or 3 other pieces, right? And so that might be something that I think I would say that is definitely something I implement, right? So it's this idea of balancing I think a kind of excellence with a kind of grace, right? Allowing where they're at, allowing the moment to celebrate that they've accomplished something here, right? Maybe pointing out some things where technically you could prove here and here, but always having that next conversation. What else could this be communicating? What else could be the next idea? Can this be something more than just a step in the process, right? Or can this be more than just a standalone? Can this be a step in an investigation of broader ideas, right? You've manifested this. What drew you to that? And how can that manifest elsewhere? So,
yeah. I will not go down the AI rabbit hole. I'd love to. Maybe we'll talk about this at a drink.
Yeah.
Yeah, everything you just talked about, I mean, that is tough love. Like, listen, where is this going to take you? What is the next step for you? Like, you've done that same thing 3 times before student. Like, what's something that, like what's a hard thing that you're straying away from? Don't surrender that over to the robot. But what is a poetry of living?
One of the things we talked about earlier is this idea of function and aesthetics in Genesis, right? And so I think the call for us is to really always keep that in balance, right? We have to do the dishes, right? Mm-hmm. We have to answer the call or write the email. We have to sleep. We have to do all these things, but there's an importance to always remember that all these things could add up to more than what they just are, right? I think it was Louise Nevelson, an assemblage artist, who talked about the way that with the same sensitivity she will put in placing a piece in her artwork is the same that she will use to pour her cup of tea, right? Now that is a high bar. It's not going to happen all the time. But I think that if we see that as something that's always there, right? There's a potential for living there, right? There's a potential in how we deal with people that are around us, right? And I'm not saying I have the answers to all that, because I know I have my complications with people, for sure. But it's always this calling of, well, what is the bigger picture of this, right? Or how could this also be a different way of experiencing life, right? That's helpful for others, right? We see meaning in being in service to others, right? That is our calling. And, on one end we could say we are just being a servant, right? We are just doing the rote thing, and that's what we're going to learn from it. And the other, you can say that, well, that fulfills certain ways, right? Clearly, the Bible is talking about work and also worship are the same thing. They are the same thing. And if you're keeping that in mind with what you're doing, it does change. It changes your life. It changes how you're viewing the traffic jam that you're running into. I'm not saying it's easy, right? But I think that we are called to do that. And then because when we are looking for this, we are looking for worshiping in our life, right? We are looking for our lives to add up to something more than what it is right now.
I just really want to understand, what does poetry of living mean? I love what you were saying about how the way that she pours her tea in the morning, that detail she reflects into her art craftsmanship. And I would love to hear the inverse, like how you treat your art painting is how you treat the person in traffic or whatever.
Right.
If there's anything there. And what makes that poetic?
Yeah. And so like maybe I'll first like talk about another artwork in some ways. My wife and I got into the habit of spending like a little bit of time, maybe before dinner or after dinner, in which I'd make tea. We both are coming home from work. The boys are off doing something somewhere. But creating a moment where we'd sit on a stoop and just like watch things out in nature, right? But the moment is kind of wrapped around this idea of tea making, right? And part of tea making, at least as far as the experience for like Western civilization, is that tea comes in these like little bags, right? And we won't get into the consumerism of that and so on, right? With these little like labels on top, right? Label, string, bag. We know this combination. And there's a whole other end where that's consumerism and so on and so on. But I just had this habit of when the tea is steeped, put it in the bags in this little dish and let it sit there. I could throw it in the trash. I just didn't, right? But then after a while, just noticing they stack up. And then when I do pick them up, they leave a stain there. And that's where that shift begins to happen, right? Is that the tea bags look like bodies, right? In some way, they all were unique, but they had this like character to them. And so what I started doing is putting them on paper instead of putting them in the dish, and allow that like water process of it, the gravity, just to kind of leave this stain on this piece of paper. It became so interesting to me how this body is leaving residue here. And then I only made a few of these, but I made sculptures in which made this apparatus like out of copper, which would just hold the bag right over top of its stain. And so there became so many things that were interesting about there. Here's this bag that seems like a body that's hanging there in suspension, in limbo, right? Here's this 2D element of, in a sense, its life's pattern, right? And also sculpture, since it's 3D, there's this like space between the two that creates a gap, right? And like that gap seems to hold all the tension, right? And that seems like something you could just like endlessly explore, right? But that shift to looking at these bags, right? Spending time with my wife, like that's poetry in life, right? Where you're doing both. You're doing something that is, in a sense, rote. We are having tea now, right? We do this at this time of the day. But then out of that comes something that allows you to rethink all of that experience and then make something out of it, which will continue to move on, right? And so, your question has to do, well, what does that have to do with traffic, right? Right? And I think it's important to, like, as much as I would mention this idea of like writing before and maybe after artwork to kind of glean ideas out of, practicing little things like this allow you to kind of bring yourself back into that moment and say, okay, well, yes, I'm late getting home, late for dinner, late to something, but this is where I am, right? How can this situation feed into, peace, loving others, thinking about how it is a potential like template for making something, right? As you say, the chaos of a situation, something comes out of that and so on. How's that for thinking about poetry in life?
Well, how many of the greatest poets and poetry out there is all based on inference? There's a piece of line, and then it's what's between the lines, that space between the lines. What is that? That line is, it's the best poetry is never literal. It's always standing in for something else, as the tea bag stands in for the body.
So I read books, I listen to audiobooks, things like that. And so I go through a lot of books over the course of a year. And during the summer, I kind of lean toward classics. I feel like at this point in my life, what I'm trying to do is backfill all the knowledge I should have had, right? All the, I wasn't paying attention, or I should have, could have, would have. So I'm backfilling, right? And so like I've kind of gotten this appetite now for like, what have I missed? What is all this potential of ideas? Right. And so I read Herman Melville's Moby Dick recently, right? And so that sounds a little cliche, but like I read the book, right? And here I thought it was about this struggle between, this guy and his tiff with this whale and all that stuff. Yeah, that's there, but the book is really about using whaling as a way to understand economics, humanity, society, culture, right? Like everything goes through the whale, right? And like, I think like that's the genius of that, right? Is thinking about how this one thing, this one activity can talk about everything else, right? And so you spend the entire time learning a lot about whaling, but how whaling affects this, or why whaling affects this, and so on. And so you get this complete idea.
Well, what's the first line of the book? It's "Call me Ishmael."
Call me Ishmael, yeah.
It's like, hey, I'm a wanderer and I don't have a home. But like right there, it's like, what does that mean? It's like, that's poetry.
Right, exactly.
Not anything, but.
Right? I mean, yeah. Well said, because it's like right there, you're in for something else other than, it was a sunny day, all that stuff. Yeah.
Matt, what's next for you?
Well, I'm always like balancing, am I drawing, am I painting, am I sculpting, and so on. I've been most recently like painting. I would say painting regrets, right? So, I visited the farm that I grew up on. It's being sort of like cleaned out for sale, right? It's going to go away.
Put some nice data centers on it.
Yeah, exactly. And what's there is like the barn, the house, and all that stuff. But there's also residue of my living there and my son's living there, and there are international scouts. They're a kind of like truck that's like rusting and all that sort of stuff. So beyond the stereotypical, yes, it's a farm and there's a truck up on blocks kind of idea, it kind of like resonates this idea of like lost potentials, right? Like this thing has or had potential. It just needs somebody to come along, and we all like want to value this thing, right? And so trying to grapple with like not just painting the thing, but how can I kind of infuse the idea of that potential lost into the painting? How does that translate into painting? What's there, what's not there? You know, how's it handled? You know, what's covered over, what's not? You know, and so again, the idea of something becoming the way to technically pursue it is really interesting.
Is lost potential where most regret comes from, do you think?
Oh yeah, I think so, right? Yeah, I think that kind of hits it, right? And I think that, you know, as a parent or as a teacher, you know, being a little bit older, being a little more experienced, I'll put it that way, right? You see what is important to you now and what you missed doing, right? And so you're right, you know, that becomes the urgency of a parent or a teacher is like, don't miss this, right? Don't miss it. And I think like trying not to scare the younger generation, right? But trying to preemptively feed them motivation, right? I think is part of what I think is important for what I do, you know? On one end, trying to be inspiring by being an artist that's actually working, processing, thinking. On the other end, really trying to like invest in the next generation, ideas that I think will hold for the long term, that maybe they won't look back and have as many regrets. Now we're all going to have regrets, but I think it's the missed opportunities, right? If I had spent a little bit more time learning math, think of what I could do now, right? If I paid attention a little more in science now, I wouldn't be backtracking and reading science and all that stuff, right? But, you know, age and maturity, all that stuff kind of gets to you. So, yeah.
I think I'm in the season where I regret I shouldn't have spent my time, money, or actions. I regret having done that with my time, money, or actions. And I'm wondering if at a certain point in life it switches to I should have done that. I regret not doing that.
Right. And I think that I did have kind of a climactic moment. Let's just let this stop. I did have this climactic moment where I was working on an installation. I was about a year into it as a 2-year project. I had spent time, money, effort. I mean, making sculpture is a physical thing. It was during the summer, so I wasn't teaching, but my boys were home, and I realized that, you know, and they were fine. I spent a lot of time with them, but at the same time, I wasn't spending time with them now. And I literally had to stop and ask myself, is the idea of this project worth all of this time, effort, money? And if it's not, I should just stop, right? But if it is, I need to dig in and continue and do that, right? And I think that, you know, I've often come to that conclusion even in teaching, right? You know, you teach and you kind of want to like spend time on your own, making your own things, right? Instead of all that energy and so on. But like it always comes back to, this is worth the effort. It is absolutely worth the effort. You know, as a teacher, and maybe you experienced this, maybe I even said it. I think my drive is wanting to have a conversation with students on a certain level. And that does not happen in their beginning years. It's just foundation for that level. And then as they kind of become juniors and seniors, having the conversation that I've desired for so long and inviting them into that, you know, I think that's what drives me to continue, right? Everyone's on that different level. I just want to, let's just move one more level up, you know. This last spring semester, I was teaching painting, and I had such a fun time with the seniors in class because I was teaching them about abstract painting. And at a certain point, and I don't remember what the joke was, but I made a joke to a student on an abstract level about their painting. And they looked at me. And they like got this like surprise on their face. And it became this like funny thing where like, there's no way I would have had that conversation or that joke with that student a year prior. They wouldn't handle it, right? And I mean, that's such a joy.
But it requires your patience for 2 or 3 years to work with this person as their mind is still in high school land or whatever.
Right.
And you're like, yep, this is 3. We only have so many years to live, Matt. And like, you're saying I'm 3 of these years I'm going to spend with this group of 20 odd students to get to that point where we can enjoy that.
Right. And honestly, the last year is letting them go too, right? I mean, that's what a good parent does. They don't wait to the end and have this big conversation and say, off you go, right? It's about like trusting them that they have grown to be at the point where you're letting them go,
Matt, where can we find you?
You can find me at Cairn University in Langhorne. You can find me at matthewstemler.com. Look at the work. And I'm around. Absolutely.
This has been such a blessing. Thank you so much, Matt, for coming.
Thank you. I really enjoyed this. Thank you.